What's up, guys? I took a few days to think about this after UFC 270 because the moment I left the arena in Anaheim, I thought to myself, watching Francis and Cyril, I thought to myself, I think Jones beats both of them. Like, I really did, after watching them in that fight, think to myself, and then talking to Henry Cejudo as he was leaving and other people, I was like, man, I think Jones might beat them both. So I was ready to admit I was wrong. I was ready to come on here and say, I was wrong, Jones beats them both. But then when you get out of the situation, you get out of the arena, you get home, you take some time. I drove all the way back from Arizona last couple of days because my daughter had gymnastics. So I had a lot of time to sit and think about everything. Then I listened to Francis, talk to Ariel and all his contract stuff. And it really dawned on me because even in the buildup, we talked about this. Francis has so much going on. And then right before the fight, I'm in the locker room and we get information that he's dealing with a very severe knee injury. And I was thinking, man, he may not get through this. But then he gets through it in the most unexpected way that you could ever imagine, with him taking Cyril Gane down in the ways that he did. But then as I thought about all those things, I thought to myself, maybe Jones does beat him. And I'm watching Jones's tweets and him almost celebrating, wow, this fight gives me a ton of confidence. You better slow down. You got to slow down. Because I had to slow down as an outsider. Because what we saw in Francis Saturday was not the Francis Ngannou that we are used to. But what we saw was a guy that was able to adjust on the fly, something that Francis didn't have before, and still keep his championship. Jon said something to the effect of, if this is the apex predator in the division, I'm excited about it. Okay, we're talking about a wounded king of the jungle. And if the wounded king of the jungle is still the best heavyweight in the world, maybe we should look at it a different way. Maybe we shouldn't judge Francis as harshly because he can't walk, amongst other things. Amongst other things. Listen, all the contract stuff and all the Tyson Fury talk and Coach Lopez chirping at him, the old teammate, that takes its toll on anyone. So to go out there and beat a guy that was called the future of the heavyweight division on bad knees, it's still something to be very proud of. Does that mean that Jon Jones can't beat those guys? I will tell you this 100% certainty. I'm less sure today than I've ever been in those guys beating Jon Jones. Because ultimately, Jones is a competitor. And he's a competitor at the highest level. And when you give a competitor like that, wounded or not, that visual, he feels now more invincible than he's ever felt in his entire life. And I'm not one to give Jones compliments easy. He's a good fighter. He really is. He's now working with Henry Cejudo. And boy, after last weekend, how do you doubt anything that Henry Cejudo does? From coaching, wrestling. You know that going into this fight, Jones is going to have a masterful game plan. He's going to have everything in order to give himself the best opportunity to win a fight against the champion, Francis Ngannou, or Cyril Gane, if that's the guy that he gets matched up against. I thought the problem was Cyril Gane. I thought Cyril Gane's size and his ability to move was going to be a very unique puzzle for Jones to try and solve. But after watching last weekend and Ngannou's ability to take Gane down, I think that Jones matches up better than I thought initially. I think Jones matches up a little better with Francis than I thought initially, because Jones is smart in there. He will minimize risk take advantage of situations to allow for himself to be in the fight. Does that mean that he's going to win? I'm not certain. But I tell you one thing, he's going to compete better than a lot of us thought prior. But we can't judge Francis on last weekend. That's the king of the jungle, and he was wounded. But if there's a time you want to fight him, it's right now. Because he's going to be coming off a real injury. And I don't know how the contract thing is going to work out. I don't know. I don't know if Francis and the UFC are going to be able to come to terms with him staying inside the octagon. I hope and pray that he does, because I know what it feels like at a Francis Ngannou fight. I know what it feels like when that man hits the curtain. I know what it feels like in the anticipation for the bomb that in so many instances has landed. I know what it feels like to sit on the edge of the seat when Francis Ngannou walks into the octagon. I know what the visual is when he walks up those steps, massive, looking to take somebody's head off. I know what it'll feel like if we ever get Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. I know there will be a lot of hype. I know that the matchup is interesting, but I also know that Jon Jones is licking his chops after watching last weekend. But what I don't know, if Jon Jones is licking his chops after watching next weekend unjustly, because Francis is as hurt as he is. Because, guys, I'll tell you this, as an athlete, it's all about the poker face. So if Ngannou actually wore those knee pads and showed that there is an injury, knowing he's going against a guy that kicks in the way that Cyril Gane kicks, it had to be absolutely serious. And now I hear that he's going into surgery. So to have a torn meniscus and to have to go into surgery days after fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world, days after going 25 minutes using your wrestling and grappling to retain your championship, if people view you as weak because of that, it tells you how strong you were before. So I'm telling you, if you're Jon Jones, you got to be careful, because, again, the champ was wounded. The champ wasn't himself on Saturday night. But even at that, even at a fraction of who he is, he still got the job done and proved to be the best heavyweight in the world. That's a frightening thought for me. So after days and days of thinking, coming off of that thought, Jon Jones beats both. I immediately thought that when I left the arena. I was like, wow, Jones will beat both of these dudes. Jones is going to be UFC heavyweight champion. I sat back and I thought about it. And I thought about the burden that Francis carried into that fight. I thought about all the chatter from Tyson to the contract to Coach Lopez to the teammate thing to the knee injury that no one knew about prior. He was carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. And those big shoulders actually were strong enough to not only fight, but keep his fight. That's another thing. Jones hasn't fought. He keeps talking. We want to see the guy fight. Go fight, right? Because talking is one thing. Saying you're a man is one thing. But the last time we saw you was 2 years ago. And I'm sure that people that watch you fight those fights thought to themselves exactly what you're thinking right now about Francis Ngannou. But Francis was hurt. It just seemed as though you got pushed to the limit by Dominic Reyes. So there is more faith for Jones supporters after watching last weekend. But I warn you to really understand all that the champion was dealing with as he went into the octagon. One thing I do agree with Jones is, though, people do fall in love with the new guy. People do fall in love with the knockouts. I've been on the opposite side of that before, where I've gone into championship fights as the underdog against Rumble because of the knockouts. And if there's a guy that can solve a puzzle that is very, very difficult, it is Jon Jones. Trust me, the guy beat me 2 times. And I know how good you have to be to do that. But don't base it on what you saw last weekend, fans. Jones, base it on who Jones is to you. But there's no guarantee that he goes in there and he doesn't get his head knocked off by Francis Ngannou. That's how good Francis is. So while it should give confidence, while it should give people courage, while it should make you want to do it more, understand that the champ was wounded. And the next time he steps in the octagon, he won't be. But I tell you one thing, all I can hope is that the UFC and Francis Ngannou comes to terms so that we have more experiences watching Francis Ngannou do his thing. Because every single time it is an event. And I am hoping and praying that last weekend wasn't the last Francis Ngannou event I get to call.